Hay called him Slow-Mo Joe, just another overweight school bus driver who took forever at every stop. Kids rolled their eyes when he checked his mirrors 3 times, laughed at his thick glasses and careful driving, mocked his daily safety speeches that no one listened to. But when armed men blocked the school bus route and ordered all 42 children off the vehicle, those same kids watched in stunned silence as this harmless old driver moved with deadly precision that could only come from one place. And suddenly everyone realized they'd been protected by someone whose past was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Welcome to Secrets Never Told. Before we continue with this incredible story of hidden heroism and protective instinct, tell me in the comments from which city are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who served in silence. Joseph Joe Martinez had been driving school bus 47 for Lincoln Elementary for 9 years. At 58, he moved with the deliberate pace of a man who'd learned that safety came first, always. His thick-rimmed glasses, slightly hunched posture from years behind the wheel, and the extra weight he'd gained since retirement made him look exactly like what everyone assumed he was. Another working-class guy grateful for steady employment with summers off. The kids on bus 47 barely tolerated him. To them, Joe was the annoying adult who made them wait while he adjusted his mirrors, checked his routes twice, and insisted on complete silence during his daily safety briefing. He drove exactly the speed limit, stopped at every railroad crossing even when no trains were coming, and refused to let anyone stand while the bus was moving. "Come on, Joe," was a common complaint from the back seats. "We're gonna be late." Joe would just nod and continue his methodical pre-drive inspection. "Safety first," he'd say in his gravelly voice. "Everyone sits down, everyone goes home." Behind his back, the kids had less charitable names for him. Turtle Joe, Safety Sally. Some of the older kids made jokes about how he probably couldn't run to catch a jaywalker, much less handle any real emergency. A few had even started a TikTok account called Slow-Mo Joe, posting videos of him taking forever to complete the simplest tasks. What none of them noticed was how Joe's eyes moved, how he tracked movement patterns around the school zones, cataloged unfamiliar vehicles parked along his route, registered license plates that appeared too frequently. They didn't see how he positioned his mirrors to maintain clear sight lines to all approaches, or how his radio was always within immediate reach. To them, he was just old Joe, slow, harmless, irrelevant. The truth was more complex. Joe had indeed worked blue-collar jobs for most of his civilian life. Construction, factory work, municipal services, the kind of honest labor that built communities and paid mortgages. But for 16 years, from age 18 to 34, he'd done something else entirely. Something that required him to move through dangerous waters, to see threats before they materialized, to make split-second decisions under impossible pressure. Nobody at Lincoln Elementary knew that Joe had served as a Navy SEAL with Team 5. Nobody knew about the classified operations in places whose names couldn't be spoken in civilian company. Nobody knew about the medals locked in a box in his apartment closet, or the scars hidden under his uniform shirt, or the instincts that still kicked in when something felt wrong. Joe preferred it that way. He'd left that world behind deliberately, choosing the predictability of school routes over the chaos and danger that had once defined him. The bus driver job at Lincoln was perfect, routine, peaceful, meaningful in a quiet way. He was protecting children, just as he'd once protected his country, but without the weight of classified missions and life-or-death stakes. Most days, nothing more dangerous than a forgotten lunchbox or a scraped knee from playground roughhousing disturbed the school's controlled environment. Joe would complete his morning and afternoon routes, check his vehicle maintenance log, and go home to his small house satisfied that another day had passed with all his kids safe. But Wednesday morning was different. It started like any other day. Joe arrived at the bus depot at 6 a.m., an hour before his first pickup, as was his habit. He liked the quiet morning routine, pre-trip inspection, route review, radio check. By 7:15, he was pulling up to his first stop, where a group of elementary kids waited with their backpacks and lunchboxes. The morning route proceeded normally. 42 kids total, ranging from kindergarten through 5th grade. Joe knew every name, every stop, every parent who might be running late. He'd seen these children grow from nervous 5-year-olds to confident pre-teens, and he took quiet pride in being a stable part of their daily routine. At 8:23 a.m., approaching the final turn before Lincoln Elementary, Joe noticed something wrong. A white panel van was parked across the intersection, blocking the normal route to school. 2 men stood beside it, wearing mismatched clothing that looked military surplus. Something about their positioning triggered Joe's instincts. Joe slowed the bus bus and reached for his radio. Dispatch, Bus 47, road obstruction at Maple and 3rd, requesting alternate route guidance. Before dispatch could respond, one of the men approached the bus, signaling Joe to open the door. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes, and Joe caught a glimpse of something under his jacket. "Morning," the man said, as Joe reluctantly opened the door. "We need to speak with the children." "Sir, you'll need to contact the school administration for any student interactions," Joe replied, his training automatically kicking in. "I can provide you with the main office number." The man's expression hardened. "This isn't a request. Open the door and step outside." Joe's hand moved subtly toward the emergency button that would alert both police and school security. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the vehicle." That's when Joe saw the second man draw a weapon. "Kids," Joe said loudly, his voice carrying new authority that made every student on the bus freeze. "Emergency drill. Everyone down on the floor now." The transformation was instantaneous. The slow, careful bus driver disappeared, replaced by someone moving with lethal efficiency. Joe hit the emergency alert, locked the bus doors, and positioned the vehicle to create a barrier between the armed men and the school entrance. "This is Bus 47, he said into his radio, his voice cutting through morning chatter with military precision. "Code red. Armed suspects at Maple and 3rd. 42 students on board, requesting immediate law enforcement and tactical response." The children, trained in emergency drills but never experiencing the real thing, followed Joe's instructions instinctively. Something in his voice, calm but commanding, made them trust completely. Through his mirrors, Joe saw more men emerging from the van. This wasn't random. It was coordinated. They targeted the school bus, knowing it would be filled with children at this exact time and location. "Listen carefully," Joe said to the kids, his voice steady despite the danger. "Stay down and stay quiet. Everything is going to be okay." The lead gunman began hitting the bus door with his weapon, trying to force entry. Joe had already activated the bulletproof barrier between the driver's area and the passenger compartment, a security feature most people didn't know existed on newer school buses. "Driver, open this door or we'll take it off the hinges," the man shouted. Joe assessed the situation with the tactical clarity that had kept him alive through 16 years of special operations. Multiple armed suspects, unknown total count, confined space with 42 civilian children, backup en route, but minutes away. He made his decision. Joe opened the driver's door and stepped out, hands visible but ready. To the gunman, he looked like what they expected, an overweight, aging bus driver who would comply rather than risk the children's safety. "Okay," Joe said, his voice carrying just the right amount of fear to maintain their assumptions. "Please don't hurt the kids." "Smart man," the leader said, relaxing slightly. "We just need them off the bus, nice and easy." "Of course," Joe replied, moving slowly toward the bus door controls. "Let me just unlock it for you." What happened next took less than 10 seconds but changed everything. As Joe reached for the door controls, his movements shifted. The apparent fumbling became precision strikes. The lead gunman found himself disarmed and on the ground before he could process what was happening. Joe used the man's own weapon to neutralize the second threat, then moved with combat efficiency that left the remaining suspects facing a very different situation than they'd anticipated. "Stay down," Joe commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life or death command decisions. The children on the bus watched through windows as their slow bus driver controlled the scene with movements they'd never seen before. Police sirens wailed in the distance, responding to Joe's alert. By the time the first units arrived, 3 armed suspects were secured on the ground, weapons confiscated, and 42 children were safe on a bus that had become an impromptu fortress. "Bus 47, this is dispatch," crackled over the radio. "Status report. Bus 47, all students secure. 3 suspects in custody. No injuries," Joe replied, his breathing barely elevated despite what had just occurred. Officer Sarah Kim was the first responder on scene. She found Joe calmly completing an incident report while the suspects lay zip-tied on the pavement, looking dazed and confused. "Mr. Martinez," Officer Kim said, approaching cautiously. "Are you injured?" "I'm fine," Joe replied, adjusting his glasses. "Kids are all secure. Weapons are safed and separated from suspects." Officer Kim stared at him. She'd worked law enforcement for 8 years and had never seen a civilian handle an armed confrontation with such efficiency. "Where did you learn to do that?" Joe looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Navy," he said simply. "SEAL Team 5. Long time ago." The revelation hit Officer Kim like a physical blow. Navy SEALs, the most elite warriors in the U.S. military. She'd driven past this man hundreds of times, never knowing she was looking at someone who'd served in the most dangerous operations on Earth. As the scene was secured and the children were safely transported to school by backup buses, word spread through Lincoln Elementary and beyond. Videos taken by residents showed the dramatic contrast between the Joe Martinez they thought they knew and the tactical operator who just saved 42 lives. The next day, Joe returned to work as if if nothing had happened. Same route, same methodical safety checks, same careful driving, but everything had changed around him. Students who'd mocked him for years suddenly wanted to sit in the front seats, asking questions about his military service. Parents who'd barely acknowledged him before now waited at bus stops to thank him personally. School administrators offered promotions, recognition ceremonies, media interviews. Joe declined them all. "I appreciate the sentiment," he told Principal Davis, "but I like my job just fine as it is." "But Joe," she pressed, "with your background, you could train security personnel, consult on emergency protocols, teach tactical response." "Ma'am," Joe interrupted gently, "I've been exactly where I want to be for 9 years. That hasn't changed. What had changed was how people saw him." Students approached him with new respect, even reverence. Some thanked him for his service. Others asked about military life. Joe answered when appropriate, deflected when necessary, and maintained the same professional demeanor he'd always shown. One morning, a young student named Marcus Williams, a 5th grader who'd been one of Joe's harshest critics, approached the front of the bus. "Mr. Joe," Marcus said, using the respectful title he'd never used before. "Can I ask you something?" "What's on your mind, Marcus? Were you scared when those bad guys came?" Joe considered the question seriously. "I was concerned," he said finally, "but not scared. When you're trained properly and you know what you're doing, fear becomes focus. Is that why you always make us practice emergency drills?" "Exactly. Practice keeps everyone safe when real emergencies happen." Marcus nodded, understanding beginning to dawn in his expression. "You were always protecting us, weren't you? Even before the bad guys came." "Every day," Joe confirmed. "That's what we do." As weeks passed, the media attention faded, but the change at Lincoln Elementary was permanent. Students followed safety protocols without complaint. Parents volunteered for additional security training. The school district implemented enhanced emergency response procedures based on Joe's recommendations. Joe still drove exactly the speed limit, still checked his mirrors methodically, still insisted on complete silence during safety briefings. But now, 42 children listened intently to every word, understanding that their safety depended on the quiet vigilance of someone who'd spent a lifetime learning to recognize and defeat threats. 1 year later, Joe received an unexpected visitor. Commander Lisa Torres from Naval Special Warfare Command found him completing his afternoon vehicle inspection. "Petty Officer Martinez?" she approached with the respect due a senior enlisted man. Joe looked up, immediately recognizing military bearing despite her civilian clothes. "Just Joe now, ma'am. What can I do for you?" "Commander Torres, NSW Command. I wanted to personally thank you for your actions and ask if you'd consider consulting on child protection protocols." Joe continued his inspection while considering. "What would that involve?" "Helping us develop security procedures for military family schools, training base personnel in threat recognition, sharing lessons learned from your civilian experience." "Would I need to leave Lincoln?" "Absolutely not. We want to understand how your military training translates to civilian child protection. This becomes our model for other school districts near military installations." Joe leaned against his bus. "Commander, I spent 16 years learning that the mission comes first. The mission here is getting kids safely to and from school every day. If your proposal supports that mission, I'm interested." "The mission never changes, Joe. Just the battlefield." That evening, as Joe completed his daily route and prepared for another ordinary afternoon, he passed the intersection where everything had changed. A small memorial had been placed there by grateful parents, not for what had happened, but for what had been prevented. He thought about Commander Torres's words, about the possibility of sharing his knowledge with other school districts, other drivers who might face similar threats. But mostly, he thought about tomorrow's route, about 42 children who would climb aboard Bus 47 trusting that he would get them safely home. 6 months after the incident, Joe's life had evolved in ways he'd never expected. The school district had quietly implemented his security recommendations across all bus routes. Other drivers received training on threat recognition and emergency protocols. Joe found himself consulting on school safety measures not just for Lincoln Elementary, but for districts across 3 counties. The changes were subtle but significant. Radio protocols were enhanced, emergency response procedures streamlined, and driver training now included basic threat assessment. Joe's suggestions weren't presented as military tactics, just common-sense safety improvements that happened to be informed by decades of tactical experience. Principal Davis had become one of Joe's strongest advocates. "That man transformed our entire approach to student safety," she told the school board during budget meetings. "His insights have applications far beyond bus transportation." The consulting work came with requests for media interviews, speaking engagements, and recognition ceremonies. Joe declined them all, preferring to share his knowledge quietly through training sessions and written protocols. One afternoon, as Joe finished his route and headed back to the depot, he found an unexpected passenger still on his bus. 8-year-old Emma Chen, a 2nd grader who'd been on Bus 47 during the incident, sat in the front seat seat looking troubled. "Emma," Joe said gently, "we're at the depot, sweetheart. Time to call your mom." "Mr. Joe," she said, her voice small, "I had another nightmare about the bad men." Joe's expression softened. Several of the children had experienced anxiety following the incident. Despite counseling and support services, he sat down in the seat across from her. "Want to talk about it?" Emma nodded. "In my dream, you weren't there to protect us. The bad men took us away, and nobody could find us." Joe was quiet for a moment, understanding the weight of a child's fear. "Emma, do you remember what I told everyone that day about emergency drills? You said practice keeps everyone safe." "That's right. And do you know why I practice safety checks every single day?" Emma shook her head. "Because protecting you and all the other kids isn't something I do just when bad things happen. It's something I do every moment, every day. When I check my mirror, when I test my radio, when I drive the speed limit. All of that is me protecting you. But what if something happens when you're not there?" Joe reached into his pocket and pulled out a small whistle on a keychain. "This is a safety whistle. My team gave it to me a long time ago. Want to know what it means?" Emma nodded, taking the whistle carefully. "It means that even when I'm not right beside you, you have the power to call for help. You have the power to be safe. And there are lots of people, your parents, your teachers, police officers, firefighters, who are all working to keep you safe. Can I keep it? It's yours. But remember, real safety doesn't come from being scared of bad things. It comes from being prepared and knowing that good people are always watching out for you." Emma smiled for the first time that afternoon. Joe walked her to the office to call her mother, then returned to his bus for the final safety check of the day. Later that evening, Joe received a call from Commander Torres. The consultation program had been approved at the highest levels. Naval Special Warfare Command wanted to formalize Joe's work into a comprehensive child protection training protocol for military and civilian schools nationwide. "The program would be based here," Commander Torres explained. "You'd remain a Lincoln Elementary driver, but also serve as our lead instructor for protective driving techniques and threat assessment in school environments." Joe considered the offer while looking out his window at the quiet suburban street where he'd lived for 15 years. "What would the training cover?" "Everything you've developed. Threat recognition, tactical driving, emergency communications, de-escalation techniques, but adapted for civilian school personnel who won't have military background." "How many schools?" "Initially, 50 pilot programs across military-dependent communities. If successful, we'd expand nationwide. The goal is creating a network of trained personnel who can recognize and respond to threats before they escalate." Joe was quiet for a long moment. "Commander, when I left the Navy, I thought I was done protecting people in dangerous situations. But these kids, they deserve the same level of protection we give to military assets overseas. So you'll do it?" "Yes, ma'am. But I have conditions." "Name them." "I keep my bus route. Lincoln Elementary stays my priority. And any training I develop has to be practical for regular people, not just former military." "Agreed. We'll start with a small pilot program and expand based on results." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Lincoln Elementary. Deputy Chief Maria Santos from the County Sheriff's Department found Joe completing his pre-trip inspection. "Mr. Martinez," she said, approaching with obvious respect, "I wanted to personally thank you and discuss a proposal." Joe looked up from checking his tire pressure. "What can I do for you, Chief?" "We've been reviewing the incident response from 6 months ago. Your actions prevented what could have been a catastrophic situation. We'd like to incorporate your methods into our school safety protocols." "What did you have in mind?" "Joint training exercises. Our officers working with school personnel to practice coordinated response to various threat scenarios. We want to use your bus incident as a case study." Joe continued his inspection while considering. "What role would I play?" "Instructor, consultant. Help us understand how someone with your background assesses and responds to threats in civilian environments." "I'm not law enforcement, Chief." "No, but you're something more valuable. A protector who thinks like both a warrior and a school employee. That perspective could save lives." That afternoon, Joe found himself in an unusual situation. The Lincoln Elementary staff meeting had been expanded to include district administrators, county sheriff personnel, and representatives from 3 other school districts, all because Bus 47's driver had suggestions about student safety. "The key," Joe explained to the assembled group, "isn't to militarize schools. It's to apply tactical thinking to everyday safety procedures." He outlined simple modifications that could dramatically improve response times, enhanced radio protocols, improved sight lines around bus stops, better coordination between drivers and school security, and basic threat assessment training for all personnel. The These aren't military tactics, Joe emphasized. They're common-sense improvements that happen to be informed by tactical experience. Superintendent Williams raised her hand. Mr. Martinez, would you be willing to present this to our Regional Safety Committee? Your recommendations could impact thousands of students across multiple districts. Joe hesitated. Public speaking had never been his preference, and he valued his anonymity. I'll consider it, he said finally. But remember, I'm a bus driver who wants to keep kids safe, that's all. 3 weeks later, Joe stood before an auditorium filled with school administrators, law enforcement officials, and transportation supervisors from across the state. He'd prepared extensively, translating his tactical knowledge into language accessible to civilian educators. School safety isn't about preparing for war, he began. It's about creating layers of protection so threats never reach our children. He presented case studies, demonstrated simple techniques, and answered questions with the patience of someone who understood that not everyone had military training, but everyone shared the goal of protecting students. The response was overwhelming. Districts requested copies of his protocols. Law enforcement agencies asked for consultation on school safety assessments. Transportation departments wanted training for their drivers. Joe accepted selective requests, always ensuring they aligned with his primary mission, driving Bus 47 for Lincoln Elementary. 1 year after the incident, Joe's influence had spread far beyond his original route. The Martinez Protocol, though he'd never approved that name, had been implemented in over 200 school districts. Emergency response times had improved dramatically, and several potential incidents had been prevented by drivers and staff trained in his techniques. But Joe's favorite validation came during a routine morning pickup. As third grader Tyler Jackson climbed aboard, he paused at the top of the steps. "Mr. Joe," Tyler said, "my mom wanted me to tell you something." "What's that, buddy?" "She said you're the reason she sleeps good at night, because she knows you're watching out for us." Joe smiled and adjusted his rearview mirror. "Tell your mom that watching out for you kids isn't work for me. It's an honor." As Bus 47 pulled away from the stop, Joe caught sight of the small memorial at Maple and 3rd intersection in his side mirror. A year later, it had grown to include flowers, thank you notes, and small American flags placed by grateful community members. 9 years of anonymity had ended in 10 seconds of action, but the mission had expanded beyond anything Joe could have imagined. Different uniform, different scale, same dedication to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The next morning, Joe arrived at his usual time, completed his pre-trip inspection, and pulled up to his first stop where a group of children waited with their backpacks and lunchboxes. As they climbed aboard, each one greeting him respectfully, Joe smiled and prepared for another day of service that now extended far beyond a single bus route. In a world that often overlooked its quiet guardians, Joe Martinez had found his perfect mission, keeping the innocent safe while ensuring his hard-earned knowledge protected children he would never meet, driven by heroes he helped train. Another morning route at Lincoln Elementary, another day of being exactly where he belonged.